Alexandra Township on the edge as a protest against undocumented foreign nationals turns deadly. We take you there live as the South African Police Service try to bring the situation under control. South Africa's leading humanitarian organization is helping South Africans and other people caught up in the Ukraine crisis. We speak to founder and volunteer-in-chief, Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. All that and more coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's first episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. Now, several people have been injured in Alexandra Township, north of Johannesburg, in clashes between foreign nationals and South Africans. It all started when a group under the banner Dudula Movement marched through the streets demanding that undocumented foreigners leave the area. We're going to go live to Alexandra, and that's where Criselda Lewis, my colleague, is. But that's going to happen in a while. For now, though, let's speak to Gift of the Givers founder and volunteer-in-chief, Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman, about their intervention in the Ukrainian crisis. Dr. Suleiman, good evening. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. Thank you.
Well, you announced at the weekend that you were ready and trying to help South Africans caught in this crisis, but also other people in need. Take us through how it all started or came about.
Well, from last week, we've been getting calls from Ukrainian people in South Africa, South African people asking to help Ukraine. And then I got South African people who told me South African families are stuck in Ukraine. And then eventually a few days ago, a South African gentleman said, look, his wife is Ukrainian. She's caught up there, but she doesn't want to come back right now. She wants to help her people. And we saw that as an opportunity to assist people. So we said, can she get supplies? And he said, yes, they are getting supplies in the area. It's not easy, it's difficult. But we said, okay, we'll start funding the process. In the meantime, let's start with what we have inside Ukraine. So on Saturday, items were bought and distributed. Sunday, it was a bit difficult with the shops being closed, being a Sunday. They managed to get some items, but already by Sunday, 24 hours later, the prices were already going up and availability of the goods was becoming a problem. Today, there was some kind of public holiday in that village, so again, it was a difficulty. But they managed to find a big warehouse or a big company that has much more goods than the smaller shops and trying to get it at a cheaper price. And that's what they're going to do now. At the same time, whilst we're supporting the South African ladies, South African man's wife, we told them to start setting up similar type of networks in other smaller areas or other cities. And they've been busy doing that very actively. And we said we'll support. So they're already moving to different cities, replicating the process, we're buying what we can get, and aid is being distributed. They said today that the numbers are now increasing, that a lot of orphans and old people came in today in the areas that they are, which is relatively safer compared to the bigger cities. And they're expecting a huge influx of people coming into the area. So that's going to require a lot of assistance going forward. That's one of the ways. The second way is I was invited on Thursday night, just very suddenly, 10 minutes before 8 o'clock, by a group of people. I know none of them. And they were from different countries in Ukraine and around Ukraine, and asked to take part in some kind of discussion around how to intervene. I made a comment in the end, and thereafter, one of the chief coordinators called me and said, look, we need assistance. We haven't done this kind of stuff before. And I've been coaching them right up till now, what to do, what not to do. And they're arranging some stuff from Europe. We'll be funding some of those items, even transport, fuel, and labor. The third one, we're busy with pharmaceutical companies and other companies in South Africa, where we're trying to get emergency medicines to fly out from South Africa into Ukraine. So those are the three things we're looking at directly, and we've already started the distribution, as I said, from inside Ukraine.
Starting with the South Africans, were there any idea how many?
That's a very worrying thing. It keeps changing. I spoke to South Africans last week, and a lot of the students don't want to come back. They said they want to finish their studies. It's going to be very hard to go back, and they need to finish the studies. So they said, look, they're looking at going into Europe and arrangements must be made with our education department and our higher education facility and our government, with those European governments, and take them to finish their course in those universities. I don't know how practical and realistic that is. If it happens, it's a miracle. I know, but if it doesn't happen, to sustain students for a long time, for accommodation, medical care, food, transport, for open-ended. You don't know whether it's going to be 1 week, 1 month, or 6 months. And in euros, it's going to be a very, very expensive business. It's going to become very difficult. And if the students are hoping to go back to Ukraine, we don't know what Ukraine is going to look like in the next month.
Now, how easy or difficult is it really to, take goods, Dr. Suleiman, to a place that is at war? I mean, how do you get to negotiate, the passage, of goods?
It's a challenge for you, but when war happens, you're dependent on the people of the country to find the corridors. There's no way any invading army can cover up every 1,000 every kilometer of an area. There's always loopholes, there's always mountains, there's rivers, there's side roads, there's back roads. You can use a donkey cart, a horse, a bicycle. You take small amounts. So it's not impossible. People they adapt to the situation. They find ways. Their families are trapped. Their friends are trapped. And they find ways. What they do require is somebody to support them with the material goods. And it's always better to buy it from inside first to support the local economy. So those towns that are not affected, to buy it from there first. Then from the nearest country, and then what we're doing is bring it from far. The best way of doing this is not to use big trucks when you go into a danger area. They get easily bombed. You have to do things very quietly, very discreetly, under the cover of darkness. And it can be done. We've seen it done in many war zones. It's how creative the people on the ground are. The more creative they are, the more people they'll achieve, the more corridors they'll open silently, and the more assistance will get through. But the moment you get an opportunity, there's only one shot at the title. You've got to move in as much stuff as possible with the small buckets, small vehicles, as fast as possible, discreetly to those people.
So it's a risk that people like you take because there's often, or rarely ever perhaps, a chance of being able to negotiate, passage of these goods.
Look, this time we're not in the country. We haven't sent teams. But yes, when we do send teams, it's high risk. In Syria, they tried bombing us. They tried bombing our hospital. Missiles went over our heads. Bombs fell where we were staying. It's a high risk. When you go in, you must be prepared that you may not come back. That's the risk you take. But the biggest risk must be taken by the people of the country because it's their own country and they need to do everything possible to assist fellow countrymen. And you give them morale, you give them boost, you give them hope, you support them already. Just in the last 3 days, just by doing simple intervention and providing finance for them to buy goods and giving them advice what to do and how to do it, they are so motivated, they are so hopeful, they feel very positive. And it's incredible what a difference it has made. They now are applying their own minds. And the lady said, look, I've got people in different villages, I'm contacting them. We're going to set up warehouses, we're going to set up offices, we're going to bring people to those areas, we're going to distribute goods. We're getting a list of what the clinics want. They want this, that, and the other medicine. They need baby food, they need warm clothes, they need bottled water, they're running out of this, they need certain type of food items. We're not buying the small food items anymore, we're buying the bulk items. We're going to save money, we're going to get people to help us with transport. We're speaking to the mayor on Wednesday of this particular town. We're getting the whole municipality involved. We're going to try to get the farmers in the area to open warehouses to do this and the other. They're starting to think creatively because there's somebody supporting their thinking and giving them a push. Otherwise, you become totally dejected, you become depressed, you stop functioning, and you become a burden to yourself and to the community.
Are you making any specific appeals to South Africans who can help in this effort right now?
Yes, this is a very expensive process. 18 rands, or more for €1, and you're buying everything in euros. It's very expensive. But whoever wants to support the campaign, we would appreciate that, where we can keep sending money to buy these items in Ukraine, preferably first. And then, of course, the other items that require in the emergency supplies in Europe. And thirdly, from South Africa. And in South Africa, with the pharmaceutical wholesalers and companies give us goods in kind, it's fine. It's the same thing as buying it. Give us money. So in those three mechanisms, we can send stuff across. And the other thing is, if funding comes through, if South Africans are still stuck and want to come home, it'll be beneficial. We have that money to bring them on commercial flights. It's much cheaper. But there is one other challenge. A lot of African students from all parts of Africa are caught up in there. They're desperate. They don't have any funding or support from anywhere. And they are really, really, distraught. And they may need to come home or they may need to go to safer zones inside Europe. We're also looking, depending on the funding, to make some assistance available for those people because they've been crying. There's nobody really to help them.
And how do you get contacted? How do people, contact your organization, those who can help in one way or the other?
Our toll-free line is the best way to contact us, 0800 786 911, or you can visit our social media pages. All the details are there.
Mm-hmm. And for the time being, you're not looking at volunteers to go anywhere?
No, we have a specific problem right now in South Africa. We lost 1,000 healthcare workers during COVID. The hospitals are understaffed, the health facilities are understaffed, and there's no new posts being created. All posts are shut. The government doesn't have the funds to open new posts in terms of health. If you take more teams out, even if it's one person, it can collapse an entire ward or a facility because there's just not enough manpower. And if people get sick or take leave, it's just going to aggravate the situation. We have backup surgeries to catch up with pre-COVID. There's so much medical interventions required in this country. So we've taken a decision at the beginning of COVID that right now our medical teams are required here. We will not send any teams outside till our own situation stabilizes medically. And then in future missions, we will look at taking our teams out.
Okay, that's all we're going to leave it for tonight. Thank you very much, Dr. Suleiman. Imtiaz Suleiman was the founder and volunteer-in-chief of the Gift of the Givers. They're trying to help South Africans stuck in the Ukraine, but also, as you just heard, they're also helping African students who are also stuck there. Well, Russia has been accused of using a fundamentally flawed reason to attack Ukraine. Ukraine legal representatives told this to the International Court of Justice. The country approached the court to intervene after being accused of genocide. Russia has snubbed the case in The Hague.
Ukraine has told the International Court of Justice that Russia's invasion is based on false allegation of genocide in Donbas. It says they've suffered irreparable harm as Russia's military operation continues. Ukraine is seeking an emergency order to stop hostilities.
Russia accuses Ukraine of committing genocide. Ukraine denies that claim in the strongest possible terms, and we will prove it. Russia claims that in order to stop a non-existent genocide, it can invade a sovereign state, Ukraine. Ukraine rejects this baseless claim. My message to Russia is this. Let us settle our dispute like civilized nations. Lay down your arms and put forward your evidence. Ukraine respects this court and follows its orders. Russia must as well.
Kyiv has called on the International Court to act urgently, but Russia has snubbed the hearing.
His Excellency Mr. Alexander V. Shulgin, Ambassador of the Russian Federation to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, indicated that his government did not intend to participate in the oral proceedings. The court regrets the non-appearance of the Russian Federation in these oral proceedings.
Ukraine filed the case based on the Genocide Convention, and both countries have ratified the 1948 treaty, which has a clause allowing the nations to take disputes based on its provisions. Meanwhile, in an attempt to find a solution, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba are expected to meet on Thursday in Turkey. Kyle Kumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, to this other crisis now currently unfolding here at home. Several people have been injured in Alexandra township, north of Johannesburg, in clashes between foreign nationals and South Africans. It all started when a group under the banner Dudula Movement marched through the streets demanding that undocumented foreigners leave the area.
Both sides were injured when the protest turned violent.
Now we are trying to keep the peace between the two parties.
Shops being operated by foreign nationals were also forced to close.
How can you chase Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana that is here for more than 20-something years doing business that they are foreigners, they must go to their country. Where are they going? We are foreigners, we got kids, we got people that we are going to school. So for more than 3 weeks now to 1 month, we are not doing anything.
But some South African hawkers were also caught in the action.
The physically brought down. My mom was sitting on the chair there, if you can go in, because she doesn't want to be on live TV. They actually closed her into the shop and actually forced the guy to stop it. And he took out a shambak for me. He said to me, no, you got to close. I said, hang on a second. I've got an elderly mother. This is her life. We've been in this business, in this premises for more than 20 years. For more than 20 years, we've been helping. I mean, I don't employ foreigners in my shop. I employ local.
Organisers of the march say they are tired of South African businesses prioritising foreigners for employment opportunities.
Let me tell you right now, most South Africans are injured. They're there at Masakani Clinic, Alexandra Clinic.
How many people have been injured?
About more than 8 people have been injured.
Were they hit with brick stones?
Brick stones. Guys, you know what? The police are failing us. The police are failing us. I've just called the brigadier, the station commander of Alexandra. She told me that it's beyond her power. So whose power must it be in?
All right, ma'am, I'll come in.
Some foreign nationals armed themselves with sticks and stones. A large police presence remains in the area.
Up next, our panelists weigh in on the attendant issues. That's after this short break.
How do you predict the future? How do you plan for a world that doesn't exist yet? We ask questions. Questions that no one can answer yet. How do we feed a growing population sustainably? How will jobs change as automation grows? How do we get the information we need to make the right decisions? We ask, then work to find answers. At the Department of Science and Innovation, we partner with industry and other government stakeholders to find answers to some of our country's biggest questions. Not just to secure our future, but the future of partners, industry, and South Africans. The Department of Science and Innovation, making sure it's possible.
Jacob Madisha runs an organization on Olodulu. The organization caters for people in his community. He donates school shoes, meals, anything that anybody needs.
While I was about to finish my 3
Several people have been injured in Alexandra Township, north of Johannesburg, in clashes between foreign nationals and South Africans. It all started when a group under the banner Dudula Movement marched through the streets this morning, demanding that undocumented foreigners leave the area. Well, to weigh in on the issues that this episode has thrown up, please welcome Dr. Seth Scooper, psychologist, as well as political analysts Asanda Ngwasheng and Ribone Tao. Good evening. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time this evening.
Good evening, Buya.
Let me start with you, Dr. Pop. What do you make? What's your take on this situation?
Well, look, first of all, I think we have created this problem through the porous borders that we've had. And we have actually retained the paraphernalia of our previous colonial and apartheid system. We need to note that actually while your earlier slot was on the war in Ukraine, the European colonialists in 1885, 1886 created the borders that we're all stuck with. And we have not moved much beyond the apartheid conceptualization of ourselves as a country. Indeed, we're not a nation. We're really struggling with that nationhood. And if it isn't this group taking it upon itself to enforce the law and order, it will be somebody else in Vembe district saying, you don't belong here. So we actually have lost a sense of our own selfhood, if you like, and it's been exacerbated by the terrible economic conditions that we see prevalent in our country, and made worse by government's ineptitude in this area. For instance, last month, the Home Affairs published a list of scarce jobs that will be available to foreigners. And if you look through that list, quite a few of the positions are actually available going begging here. Just one example, call center agents. Now, many countries rely on South Africa for their call center agency, which operates from various parts of this country 24/7. And yet we find jobs like that being enabled for foreigners. However, I've got other aspects to deal with in terms of our own acknowledgement of issues that we should be confronting in the southern tip of the African continent. It is just not on for groups like the one that you've portrayed going around policing when there's Department of Labor, for instance, there's Home Affairs, there's the police, there's various other entities that are supposed to do this, and they fail to do it. So law and order is going down the drain. And unfortunately, a lot of this affects fellow Africans. So a large part of it is Afrophobic, and it comes from our own sense of lack of affirmation of self. We have accepted the apartheid Bantustanization of our minds. And indeed, if we look at it, all of humanity, well, science tells us at least 95% of the world's population can trace their DNA to the Komani San, the oldest living ethnic group in the world that lives in the desert bordering South Africa, Botswana, Namibia. So all this about they belong wherever is an apartheid construct that we also need to deal with. So it's not a simple, straightforward matter, Vuyo. It is something that we need to be engaged on, and government needs to be much more responsive and proactive to preclude vigilante groups emerging, because law and order will just go down the tube as it's tended to go down already.
Asanda, your take?
Thank you, Vuyo. I think that, I agree with the previous speaker on most of what they said, that this is a failure of government. So when the Department of Labor doesn't do its job, when Home Affairs do not do their job, and there isn't regulation, this is what's going to happen. People are going to step in and they're going to take the space. And I've actually said this in previous interviews before, that it's just a matter of time before seemingly peaceful protests are going to turn violent pretty soon. And the reason I said that is because when you are dealing with a mob, you're not going to be able to control. You just need one person to kind of break out, and the whole thing is going to fall apart. And while this particular one is not by, Operation Dudula, which is the movement that we've seen leading these kind of protests, it's now what seems to be some kind of splinter group, which is called the Dudula movement. And they are already telling us that they are going to shut down Alex for the next 5 days. And I'm not surprised that people are doing this, because people are facing dire economic circumstances, and they feel like they are watching other people make money, get jobs, when they don't have jobs. And so the government needs to, first of all, figure out, why is it failing to regulate labor? Why is it failing to do its job at a Home Affairs level? Because like any country, South Africa has laws that govern who can and can't work, who can and can't have a business. And for the most part, these laws have not been adhered to. And so that we have people who have now taken it upon themselves to do the sorting is the danger, because we don't know what new criteria they are going to introduce. But the job of monitoring, the job of ensuring that there is some semblance of following the law needs to happen, and government needs to take that up very quickly, because if they don't, we are going to see this kind of vigilante labor monitors, vigilante business visa monitors across the country. And we know particularly Alex is a very dangerous one, because that was the source of the last major, xenophobic attacks that we have. But I also want to caution that we also need to admit that there's a sense in which, as middle class in South Africa, we have a tendency of not listening to poor and working class South Africans when they tell us about the negative impacts of unfettered immigration that has not been regulated on their daily lives and existence. And I think these are two conversations that need to be had. So we need, on the one hand, to be condemning xenophobia and the violence with all our might. But on the other hand, we need to be opening up spaces, opening up dialogue around how does unfettered immigration without any regulation affect the ordinary working class and poor people of South Africa. Because if we're going to do that, its expression is going to keep coming in violence. And for as long as we are not giving people the opportunity to tell us what they think is happening, why they think it's happening, we will not be able to find the solutions for this.
Ribone?
Thank you, Voya. Good evening to you and the rest of the panel and the viewers at home. I think one must start by saying that what is happening, I mean, it's not a new thing. We can go back to 2008, xenophobia attacks, what happened in Alex at the time. But I don't want us to look at this thing in isolation of what is happening in the continent, the challenges, that you look at Mozambique, the issue of Cabo Delgado, you look at Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is going for the elections in next year and by elections on the 26th of this month, and we know that a lot of Zimbabweans fled the country because of the political instability in that country. And the reality of the matter that we're seeing the violence again happening in Zimbabwe, building up to this by-elections. The unfortunate part is that the ruling party itself is not able to have frank conversations with its sister parties within the former liberation movement, because Frelimo, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF, to say, guys, yes, we have fought the revolution, we're here, and why are they not able to take responsibility for their citizens? So I think the ANC has failed in this regard, and up to so far, we have not seen even government leaders condemning this Dudula elements and so forth. And it's unfortunate today that 4 people got hurt, and if this thing is not dealt with by the government and the ruling party, also speaking in every frank conversations with their sister parties, because charity begins at home. Before we look at the rest of the continent, but here at home within the region, the challenges that people are living in their home, their home countries, where is their dignity, as they leave their countries to come and work? Some of them, Zimbabwe is in the past, we know that in terms of education, they produced a lot of young people, and today some of them are working, in restaurants. Some of them are working in car washes, around the malls. And this, some of them are highly educated, but because their government has failed them and they had to flee for survival. Most of them, when you engage with them, no one wants to be in a foreign land, but they are forced by material conditions. So I think the ANC's got a responsibility to talk to its sister parties, and the government should also show leadership at this present moment, because we can't have a government that always reacts to issues, just like we saw with the July unrest, when the government acted later, and the report of the July unrest really also emphasizes on how the cabinet failed. And even now, we'll see that again, that should people die, that's when the only government will react to this thing. So it's very sad that the ANC as a governing party is not saying anything and is not holding its sister party within the former liberation accountable for the acts that are happening in those countries, in their respective countries.
Let's get into some of the issues that each one of you have raised. Dr. Cooper, what would be the point or benefit of reopening conversations around borders?
Well, first of all, we've never really had that conversation. If you recall, Vuyo, we had Mangosuthu Buthelezi as our first Minister of Home Affairs, and he started a process which just didn't see fruition. And the examples raised by my fellow panelists are germane here. We just simply do not have leadership that is capable of dealing with the sets of crises. Now it's this. Previously, it was COVID, and of course, the other stuff that we are well seized with, like corruption, etc. So consumed are our leadership by their own issues that we tend to ignore how the majority in this country merely survive. And we know that there is crass poverty. The wealth and poverty extremes still continue to make us the most unequal society on earth. All the warning signs, like the examples mentioned by the previous panelists, are germane here. What we really do have is a government that seems to have not reached an agreement amongst itself on the way forward on these issues. They have been in power since the dawn of democracy, and there's no really viable policies that are enacted and we see results from. We just got to go to the Home Affairs to see that multitude of humanity out there in the various offices. We've just got to, and Alex is the touchstone because it is right in the doorstep of the heart of capital in this country, Sandton. And what we saw before, that can rear itself again. We saw some signs over time in different ways throughout the country. We just need the leadership to engage with the players on the ground throughout the country. And therefore, that kind of conversation should not be the government choosing who they want to listen to, because they will continue to allow this kind of social insecurity and economic uncertainty prevail. And communities will take the law into their own hands. And the pictures that we see, even in this shot, speak 1,000 words. Communities all over this country have been saying, the research shows, that it's only by extreme action that we take that we seem to be listened to. And meanwhile, they injure their own humanity and they injure ours collectively. So something needs to give, and it should not be these kinds of groups being allowed free rein. Remember that when it happened initially, we had the Minister of Labour telling us it shouldn't be happening. They did not deploy inspectors to do these kinds of work. So maybe sometimes government should actually incorporate some of these citizens into their thinking, because maybe they will do some of the regulatory work much better, but not as vigilantes, enabled community activists. So there's multiple conversations that need to be had, and we should have them. Otherwise, we refrain from doing it at our own peril.
Asanda, you spoke about opening up spaces. And one wonders whether if all of you agree that those whose job it is to do something about these things aren't doing so. You all agree that, vigilantism of whatever kind, is not a solution, right? What spaces do we still need to open, or where, are these spaces? What have we not done, that could actually get those whose job it is to, do things, to do what they're supposed to do? What's still there to tap into?
I think that, we have a history in South Africa of churches, of civil society organizations, and other, people in the communities who are leaders, who have the capacity to begin these dialogues, to begin these conversations around what does it mean to live in a South Africa as, as a diverse South Africa, and also as a South Africa that has citizens from all over the world and not just the African continent. And what is the impact of having that? Because one of the things that we often forget is that, yes, globally, there is globalization happening. So people are moving in different directions globally. If you go to New York, for example, you'll be hard pressed to find an American taxi driver. You're probably likely to find a Ghanaian or, somebody from another country that's not America. And so what's happening to us is not unique. It is a globalization process. But what is unique is that we as South Africa are coming from a very specific history where the Black people of this country were secondary citizens, where the Black people of this country were not allowed to get the level of education they wanted. We're not allowed to access certain opportunities. And so when 1994 came and the gates or the borders of South Africa were opened for any and all to be able to access, there wasn't a plan for what are we going to do with the Black South Africans who are still catching up, who are still needing to access certain things, who are still needing to enter the market in a way that is different than when they entered the market during apartheid. And because we didn't have those conversations, we are now finding ourselves in the situation that we are in. And I also want to bring in that, as South Africans, we do have intergenerational trauma around immigration, because you must remember that this is the same country that brought in people as indentured labor from India, that brought in people as slaves from Malaysian countries and all over the continent. And then at the height of apartheid, built a hierarchy of humanity that put the person who used to be an indentured slave, i.e. Indian people, at the top, and then put colored people who were a mixture of the former enslaved people, immediately after that, and then put the very Black people at the bottom. And so you are dealing with that trauma of having experienced before people who previously were foreign coming in and being prioritized and being given advantages as South African citizens while you are stuck in your homeland and not even allowed to own land, never mind a business in your country. And so we cannot look at this without thinking about that history, without thinking about this context. And we have to have those conversations of what has the impact of immigration been in South Africa? What has our experience of immigration been in South Africa? And how do we begin to chart a way forward that allows for everybody to live in harmony, while we are also having these conversations at the level of the African Union, as has been said, because people are running away from something. And what we need to be dealing with is also what are the push and pull factors, and why is it that the entire continent seems to be falling apart in terms of political structures and nothing is happening, and South Africa is being forced to play host, while our government, as has been said, is not calling out the other governments who are failing dismally and creating this crisis that we are seeing ourselves in. So there's a multitude of things that need to happen, and there's a multitude of conversations that need to happen. We need to have honest conversations across the continent about South Africa's capacity to even be able to host the number of people that it has legally or illegally. Because until we have those conversations, until we are figuring out how do we fund the people who do need to come here and who are running away and are not going to stop coming, by the way, just because we've decided we don't want them to come. So we need to have those conversations. We need to have those dialogues at multiple levels, at the level of the African Union, at the level of, the SADC, at the level of South Africa, and at the level of local communities. And we have seen that South African communities are able to do this. For example, in Cape Town, there are street patrols that are made up of non-nationals and South Africans. And there are some communities where people are able to work together and people are able to engage each other, but it hasn't been happening at a national stage, and that requires leadership. And unfortunately, we're sitting in a situation where our leaders are sleeping on the job. And this is what happens when leaders sleep on the job. People take things into their own hands and do with the power that they have as they see fit.
Rwanda, how realistic really are we to when we say there needs to be these frank conversations among the parties of liberation? Aren't they too concerned with every day that passes? All of them have or are losing power. My understanding, from the little that your ANC would say when it meets with ZANU-PF, there's hardly any frank conversation there. These people sort of tend to lick their wounds or, reminisce about days gone by, but without really advancing any real or progressive agenda.
Well, the reality of the matter is that where we are currently, you're correct. And I always say, SADC, for example, it's an old boys club. They just sit there and they don't speak on the real issues. Now, with the former liberation movement, it will be in the best interest of the ANC to have these frank discussions. And why I will say this, just the local government elections, the decline of the ANC, the rise of Herman Mashaba, because Herman Mashaba played on the card of not on the issue of illegal migrants that are in South Africa. So that card really worked for Herman Mashaba. So if that is not a wake-up call for the ANC to have that frank discussion within the former liberation, then it's clear that 2024 will be difficult for them. And we're seeing the growth of Action SA, as we've been seeing even the past weekend, they were launching in Northwest. So it is going to give the ANC a very difficult time. And that's why we saw even the decline of the EFF, in Johannesburg, because of Julius, when he kept on saying that we are one Africa, we don't have to have borders. And those South Africans on the ground decided that we will rather vote for him and Mashaba. So it will be in the best interest of the ANC. But to say this is that, while we're dealing with this issue, these are small resources that we find ourselves as Black people fighting. It's like someone is diverting us from dealing with the real issues of this country. The economy of this country is still in the hands of the minority of this country. We have not seen any transformation towards the economy of this country. We're still dealing with the issue of the land, how to take it, the amending of the constitution, when we're supposed to be dealing with the real issues. So it seems like there's a concerted effort to divert us from dealing with the issues, because the reality of the matter is that, fine, let's say they leave or they don't leave, the migrants in this country. But once they leave, for an example, we'll then say we want the bigger pie. So I think that we also, in this present moment, the ANC-led government needs to deal with the issue of the economy of this country. COVID-19 gave them an opportunity, and they missed that opportunity to restructure the economy of this country, where it will be for everyone, because we're fighting for us these small resources in the townships. Thank you.
Dr. Cooper, the point is not to whinge and moan. It's to get these things acted on, all these problems. If you were to, in a business-like fashion, say, these are the 3 things that we need to do now, what would those be?
I think government needs to seriously look at the basic income grant that has been proposed and has been shut down for a long time, because our citizens, as long as we leave them in the condition that they are, will take the law into their own hands. It's simply untenable for us to continue that way. That's 1. 2, we need appropriate regulation. We need enforcement of those regulations. And 3, we need what all of us have been talking about, frank, open conversations that are inclusive, not an elite, talking heads, speaking to each other from the comfort of their homes and ignoring the vast seething mass of people out there who are in reality Africans in the main, who are right at the bottom of this heap. And the longer we shift that responsibility to the population to fend on their own, we will reap the whirlwind. And ultimately, how we treat the worst off amongst us underpins our own claim to being human. We can appeal to everybody's humanity, but there's a time and a place for it. Otherwise, we'll be talking over people's heads.
Sanda?
I think that, one of the biggest problems we have is that for as long as government does not see the issues of South Africans as their issues, we are going to continue to hurtle from crisis to crisis. It is a job of government to ensure that labor laws are adhered to. It is a job of government to ensure that business visa laws are adhered to, and all other kinds of bylaws. It is also the job of government to ensure that they are engaging in the international relations strategy with the biggest groups, the countries with the biggest groups coming in as refugees or people fleeing from their homes. And I think that for as long as government is not doing this job, we're going to continue to see this cycle of violence. And for as long as we are not having these conversations, we are also going to see this cycle of violence. And we also need, as part of those conversations, to also start educating South Africans about the legality of becoming, of being a migrant in South Africa, because not everybody that wasn't born in South Africa is not South African, and not everybody that that was born outside of South Africa doesn't have a right to run a business, to be educated, and to do all of these things that we all need and want to do for our livelihoods. And so when we begin the process of kind of looking at people and deciding that you are foreign and you are not, that's where the problem starts. We know as South Africans that in the 80s, there was a big war between the IFP and ANC members, and it got so basic that you would get asked if you know what the elbow is in Zulu, and if you didn't know what it was, then you were in big trouble on the trains of Johannesburg. We do not want to go back to that kind of separation of people, that kind of tribalism and ethnic kind of division. We want to be able to move forward as a nation that is able to talk about the difficulties that we face, to talk about the ways in which we hurt and harm each other, but is also able to allow everybody to live in peace and harmony, because nobody flees home to come and fight in somebody else's country. And so we need these conversations, and we need our government to lead us at an international level, at a regional level, and at a local level, because for as long as they are absent from their role, people are going to fill in, and we have no control over who is going to fill in those spaces, over what kind of characters are going to fill in those spaces, over who is going to also be doing the leading. And most importantly, we also need to start talking to our business, because business has a huge role to play in this, because they do sometimes employ, particularly undocumented people, so that they can pay them pittance, so that they don't have to pay them the minimum wage. And these are things that need to be addressed. We cannot pretend that they're not happening. And while we are addressing them, we must condemn the violence, but we must also speak honest truths about the state of where we are and what is happening to our people across the different lines.
Final thoughts from you, Rebone?
Just to start off on what the latter speaker said, on the issue of business, look at Africa. We've got so much minerals, and resources in this country. But the poverty in this continent, but the poverty that we live in as Africans, where resources are leaving our continent annually, it is sad. And secondly, I want to make an example. When you are a guy and your male friend is abusing his wife and his kids and not even buying them food in the house, and you still sit with that friend and not condemn that friend, then there's something wrong with you. So that is for the ANC, that they can't just continue to look the other way and not condemn what their friends are doing when they're sitting at this level, at these meetings, whether at a party-to-party level or at a state-to-state level. So where we are also, we need to also make sure that the issue of the borders, and the issue of people that working around the borders, whether the soldiers, whether Home Affairs officials really don't also take bribes, because of who might not also be aloof to some of these things, that bribes are also paid in this process. Government officials are involved in some of these things.
Okay, and that is where we are going to leave it for this evening. Special thanks to Rebone Tao, Asanda Washeng, and Dr. Seth Cooper. And that's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Good night.